They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Tom Hunter? What, Selby? Not Chen.
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hiya everyone, and welcome back to Everybody's Dead Dave, a Red Dwarf review podcast featuring me, Adam Martyn, and...
me, Phil Hawkins.
And first of all, if you are joining us for the very first time, hello, welcome to the podcast. And if you are a returning listener, again, welcome back. And but for those of you who are new, the premise of this podcast is we are two sci-fi fans embarking on Red Dwarf. Now, I am watching Red Dwarf for the very first time. I know, get all your gasps and shock horrors out the way. I have never seen Red Dwarf before this run through. I'd heard a lot about it, but never seen it. But compared to Phil, what's your history, Phil?
I have been watching Red Dwarf for many decades. Not quite since the beginning. I'm not quite old enough for that, but since the sort of mid-90s. So it's I've been watching it a while. And I've during that time I've done a couple of watch throughs up to where it was at that point. But this is the first one in about 5 or 6 years.
So in many respects, we're both rediscovering a lot of things we found over the first time, but yeah, and we have reached on our journey. We're on Series 2, we're on Episode 5, which is titled Queeg. Originally broadcast on BBC Two on the 4th of October, 1988, just because that's my mathematical nerdy brain going there. Brief synopsis of this episode for you. When the ship's senile computer, Holly, allows a meteorite to damage the ship and Rimmer's hologram to malfunction, the crew lose faith in him, and Holly's backup computer, Queeg 500, takes command of Red Dwarf. That is your synopsis. So, going into episode 5, Queeg then, well, it all seems to start off quite normal at first, doesn't it? For a Red Dwarf episode, as normal as it can be.
I like the fact that Liz is doing a magazine personality quiz.
Yeah.
Which I have an affinity with that. I loved doing those. Not necessarily the same type of ones he's doing here, but just generally. I remember doing them in magazines and circling the answers and things. So, yeah.
No, I used to love doing them for, like, if it was, like, character ones, like, you know, superhero comics, it'd be like, oh, which superhero are you, basically? Yeah, and they were styled like family trees, and you, like, scrolled down the yes or no answers, and, yeah, they were good fun, they were. And I want the first thing that I think really took my eye was when the meteorite in question does hit. There's a very odd slow-mo, like, you know, the crash. It's an odd slow-mo effect they use, almost like very juddery frames. And at first, I have to admit, I thought that was my internet buffering, and I went back and I was like, oh no, they just decided to do that, you know, weird slow-mo stuttery frame thing, which I know was used a fair bit in, you know, at the time in the late 80s, because the slow-mo, I guess, you see in things like The Matrix hadn't been developed yet. But yeah, I don't know. I feel half and half on that effect in general, not just to this episode. I'd never really like it. I don't like that whole juddery slow-mo effect. So, yeah,
Camera shake and slow-mo.
That's it. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it does look a bit dated now, I guess. I don't know how... I mean, it's hard to tell. I'm trying to think of what to compare it to that might have been of the same time. I suppose something like Star Trek The Next Generation would have been around about the same time, which obviously didn't do it as badly, but obviously had a much bigger budget. So
true, that American money, man, sweeping it.
But even they may have done it slightly better, but they still basically shook the camera while the crew sort of fake wobbled around.
Yeah,
they still did that on Star Trek The Next Generation. So yeah, I think technological limitations at the time, I think we can probably forgive them for it. It doesn't look great, but...
Yeah. I think that's part of the charm of Red... As we've said, there are many elements of Red Dwarf, both of the ship and the events that are very, well, considered now retro and of its time, like we said before. The copious use of CRT TVs on this futuristic spaceship is incredible, and triangle cassette tapes and all that. And I must admit, jumping ahead slightly by a scene, but I'll come back, but it's a theme throughout the whole thing. When we see Holly a lot through this episode, he's on a moving like sort of television stand thing, and I spent a lot of time looking at that TV. You know, it's got the little digital time code at the front. It's very 1980s, but I love it. I wasn't like,
it's not the first time we've seen him on this TV either, is it? 'Cause they went down to a sort of moon surface to have a Rimmer's Death Day party in one episode that we've already watched, and he was on it there. It's just the amusing thing. It just, and I said this in that episode, that it just reminds me of being in primary school and then wheeling around the school television, this big CRT school television, to the classroom because you were watching a video that day.
Yeah,
it was all very
video
exciting.
Cassette.
Yeah, a VHS.
5 consecutive weeks getting through Ben-Hur at school. That was a chore. But well, they couldn't show that all in one, could they? Because it's like 4 hours long.
The two things I remember, it was always like the last week before Christmas or something like that, where they'd let us do fun stuff. So they'd wheel in the TV and you'd get to watch a video, and people would bring them in. And I remember once we watched Basil the Great Mouse Detective, and another time, because they basically said, okay, you can bring them in, and then we'll choose from the VHSs you bring in. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I think I must have been 10 or 11, brought in a compilation of Morecambe and Wise.
Ooh.
Yeah, which, a bit odd. Okay. I'm not sure. And I think we even watched it. And I don't know, I can't remember if it was a voting system. I don't know why the teacher thought, okay, let's go with this one.
We all like a bit of Morecambe and Wise, don't we?
Sure, yeah. I don't know how
for
it won out.
For a bunch of 10 and 11-year-olds, though, that's impressive, yeah. No, and I mean, throughout the whole ship's damaging, going back to that first scene, Holly gets, I mean, he's funny anyway, but he gets some great belters in this. Like, I think my favourite line in that first scene in particular was when, like, after the asteroids hit.
I don't know, the damage report machine's been damaged.
Just because it's such a silly line, but it fits that deadpan delivery so well. And, it's such an absurd concept, like, oh, we have damage report machines, and guess what? They've been damaged as well. So it just really made me laugh.
And the fact that he appears on the screen before the meteor hits, and he's like, oh, there was something I was going to tell you. I can't remember what it was. And then he hits, and he was like, oh, yeah, there's a meteorite about to hit. When it's already hit.
It was brilliant. And
before it hits as well, Rimmer is playing chess. No, not chess. Checkers.
Checkers, yeah.
With one of the scutters. And it's so epitomizes Rimmer's character, because he knows he's going to lose, and so he's just he's just taking a long time to make his move, because he knows the scutter is due on duty and therefore will have to forfeit the game to go on duty, and that's how he's going to win. It's like the sly, underhanded nature of Rimmer.
I was going to say, it's the slimiest aspect of Rimmer's character to win a game like that, But he presents it in such a way where you still sort of love him for it. You don't think, oh, you horrible person. You're sort of like grinning, going, oh yeah, you slimy so and so. No, it's a great epitome of his character. And speaking of Rimmer, when they go and investigate the damage, I was surprised that, start the scene and we only see the top half of poor old Chris Barry.
Yeah, and, because it's hit, the meteor has hit where the holographic computer is.
And I must say again, for the late 80s, the fade effect I thought was pretty good.
Yeah.
But his disappearing body parts and the whole legs coming back to sort of sync up. I was like, yeah, they did that pretty well. It was pretty seamless. I didn't see like much fringing or anything that sort of gave it away. By all intensive purposes, I think they pulled off that effect quite well.
Yeah, and the whole scene with the various errors that are going on with the holographic stuff, it doesn't last massively long, but it does lead to some great stuff with Chris Barry showing off his skills in impersonation and acting, because he cycles through so many voices, because initially he ends up getting the personality of various other crew members somehow in this mix up, and so initially he's one that we don't really know, the ship's psychiatrist, and which he does in an amusing, I think, Scottish accent, is it?
Yeah.
Well, you see, the shuttle was late, you see. The shuttle was late. And they're usually so good, aren't they? They're so good, they're brilliant.
and then he starts impersonating and repeating back what Holly and Lister are saying.
No panic, everyone. I've got it in hand.
Just need to override the charge relays.
Just need to override the charge relays.
But how'd you do that, Hol?
In their own accents. And he does a really good job, which is there are audiobooks of Red Dwarf based on the novels that got released, and Chris Barry is the narrator, and you can see why, because he can do a brilliant interpretation and impersonation of everyone, really.
Yeah, they were so flawless, like particularly his Lister one, like considering he's just repeating the exact line, they almost sounded exactly the same to some extent, and he was absolutely brilliant. To swap from your own character to someone else's is hard enough, but the fact he's doing his character, an impersonation of Lister, and then Holly, all like bam, 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 and they probably, just because of, how scenes were structured back in the day, they probably filmed that in one go, or, like when for any take they did it. So for him to swap constantly, that's a true actor's skill, and to keep that up as well. So absolutely, Chris Barry shone. And the one that got me, and it led to something else, actually, because before this, when we see, as we said, Holly's moving around on his little TV stand, throughout the whole first bit, before the malfunctions, I was like, this is reminding me of something. And I was like, I can't quite pinpoint what. And funnily enough, it was one of the errors that Rimmer experienced that sparked it. When the others move off and he sort of like replays himself, like the before he moves.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, I get it. I was like, Holly's reminding me at this minute of Max Headroom, from...
okay, yes.
So for those who maybe are a bit younger, Max Headroom was a big pop culture, I guess, phenomenon in the mid to late 80s, and he was just this guy dressed up to be like an over-the-top American newsreader against I say CGI, a very primitive CGI background, and he'd do things like that. His motions would be stuttered, he'd like replay himself, his voice would go up and down in pitch. Like, go and Google it if you haven't seen it, but I don't know,
didn't he gate crash like a broadcast or something at one point?
Well, he had his own TV show, and then famously, it's called the Max Headroom Incident. Again, give it a Google. An American airing of Doctor Who of all shows on a American station was interrupted by a prankster who was wearing a Max Headroom outfit and a pseudo Max Headroom background. And he spoke for about 90 seconds before the station got control.
The real Max Headroom.
That wasn't the real Max. He had his own, I think it was on Channel 4, his own show. And really all it was, he was like the bumper between music videos. Like, so he'd maybe make a comment, or they're all on YouTube, I think. You can go and check them out, those who are listening. But I don't know. And the more I thought about it, Holly moving around, and he reminded me of sort of like anti-Max Headroom, because Max Headroom's very like active and wild. He's always like either screaming or shouting or doing all that. Holly's sort of like the opposite, because he's obviously very toned down and he's very like deadpan. And I think it was just that whole TV aesthetic and like the TV moving around, because I've seen that with Max Headroom as well. I think that it just drew the connection, and I do wonder, I mean probably not, but I wonder if maybe it was in the very back of the creators' minds, that's that sort of style or the antithesis to it. But yeah, I just got major Max Headroom vibes from this episode.
And then because Holly has been acting kind of odd and just failing left, right, and centre at his job,
yeah,
we get
pretty much
Queeg appear.
Yeah, good old Queeg.
The backup computer.
And I mean, what a surprise to hear that booming American accent. The guy who look brief now, but the guy who played Charles Orgins, I think I'm saying that right, or Charles Orgins, the guy who plays Queeg. I just want to say right off the bat, fantastic performance. Like right from the word go, it's like you sit up and listen. Do you know what I mean? Because I think he is again such the opposite to Holly, who's quite, not that you don't listen to Holly, but Holly's quite laid back. Whereas when you hear that big booming voice, you sort of, your ears prick up a bit, I think, and you go like, whoa, okay, this is different. And I think that was the right tone to go for. I did worry when they mentioned about a backup computer that I thought, oh, is it just going to be someone else sort of doing a not so good impression of, a Holly, like that sort of deadpan thing. So I'm kind of glad that they went the complete opposite with that, because I think it really, really did work.
Yeah. And Holly's demoted to night watchman.
the Night Watchman, which isn't that involves him wearing a flat cap, as we learn later in this episode, and a little scarf. But yeah, Queeg, right from the go, he's quite intimidating, isn't he? He sort of establishes a dictatorship aboard Red Dwarf, and he pretty much has control of Rimmer, as we learn in the next scene.
Yeah, well, I quite like how Rimmer, initially, he's quite on board with Queeg. Initially, he's like, yes, this is great, the scutters are doing their work, it's never been run more efficiently, and, and then it starts to go badly for him, so he quickly changes his mind.
Soon as it starts going wrong for him, he's like, no, I'm not having it. Although, I must say, the first thing we see with him is he gets woken up at 6 a.m., and Rimmer's like, oh, we had this understanding, he leaves me till 10, usually with breakfast. But I'm certain in somewhere in season 1, there was a whole thing of that Rimmer liked to get up super duper early at like 4 a.m, and that annoyed Lister.
Well, he does, but I think it's mostly for show, because he does... Because there's that, I remember there's one episode where he gets up and he's like, right, come on, Lister. And then he notices Lister's not there. And he's like, oh, okay, well, because he basically wants to do it to show, to try and make himself look better in front of Lister. But
yeah.
So no, I'm guessing if he wants to be able to go, oh, look, I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock to Lister, but then not actually get up at 6.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. I don't know. It just reminded me of that moment where he does shoot up, and I thought, oh, hang on, have we just forgotten that? But I think you're right, because it's sparking more things now. It could just be for show. But yeah, the crew's relationship with Queeg sours pretty quickly, including the cat. And I must say, I'm glad the cat did get involved in this in a way. He was affected by Queeg, because I think in past episodes, I think we said before, either Cat doesn't get much to do, or the events of the episode only seem to really affect Lister and Rimmer, and Cat's just sort of in the background doing his own thing. So as soon as Queeg was like, you too, like, you're going to work, I was like, good, like, at least, you know what I mean? The consequences are literally affecting everyone. I don't know, I like that. I know, like that.
I know exactly what you mean, because he has felt a lot of the time like the cat is just there to say the occasional line about is that shows that he's got cat-like qualities, and in the background, and kind of it doesn't really get involved directly. But he does here. He still has those lines about getting like and they're good ones too. He has lines about
cats do not work
when he's told he has to work. Cats do not work, which that is cats. Cats they don't want to do anything, and they just want to sit around and nap, and and there's lines about naps as well.
Yeah. No, I just think it's as we've said before, when we critique the cat character like this, we've not got anything against Danny John Jules, the actor. I think he does a fab job. I just think at the moment anyway, with what Cat's being presented with as a character, doesn't necessarily always give him much to work with, as you say, apart from like the occasional maybe funny line while standing in the background. So to see him actually get involved and face the sort of consequences of what Queeg's doing and all that, I just it's a nice shift. It's nice to see him actually face up to it. And we see sort of, I guess, a montage of that happening. Lister and Cat cleaning the floors, and Rimmer seems to be always running about, even if he's fainted or whatever. I must admit, though, some of the scenes where they sort of discuss it and all that, I think some of the jokes they build up to for me feel a bit laboured, or they didn't land with me. Particularly the one about the thing they were going on about the shoes. Do you know what I mean? The shoes have souls joke.
Oh, yes, I was going to mention that too, because that felt very laboured. It was kind of like from the very beginning. It was like, okay, he's leading you on here. There's like, okay, now get it over and done with, and then there was the punchline, and it was, I mean, in fairness to Craig Charles, he does deliver it very well, but it's just a very laboured joke for a not very good punchline anyway.
Yeah, the whole shoes. I mean, I think I'd have to remember, I think even in the studio audience, when he does the shoe have souls, like, they laugh, but I think you can hear one or two groans in there. It is that sort of like Christmas cracker, oh, shoes have souls. It's like, oh, and
I think I think it's good that Craig Charles plays it like he knows it's a terrible dad joke. Yeah, and he's like, you can tell in his inflection that he's doing it like, oh yeah, and here's the cheesy punchline, and he knows it, and the character knows it's cheesy and terrible. So there is that, but yeah, it does. That's the one major negative I put down as well. I was just like, that joke.
Yeah.
No.
I think think is because as well, it's not just like a small joke in a scene. I think if I remember, it is literally the whole scene. Like it builds to this joke before we move somewhere else, and it's sort of like, I guess well, I sort of thought, did we? It
starts though with a Peterson reference, which I liked because he references his old friend Peterson, who we've met several times in flashbacks and things. Played, of course, by I can never remember the actor's name, but the thingy Weasley from Harry Potter.
Mark Williams, I think.
Mark Williams, yes, of course.
Wonderful Mark, yeah. No, I hope he comes back again. It'd be great to see him. But some nice little callbacks and. Another thing that didn't quite land for me, when Lister and Kat are scrubbing the floor and we see Holly appear on his night watch with flat cap and scarf and all, because it's nighttime, he's gonna get cold apparently. Whilst it was a nice scene, again, I just think some of the jokes again were a bit too laboured. Like the one I think there that stood out for me was the oh, go on, like ask me anything, like what's the nearest planet to the sun. That whole thing I thought was a bit too laboured. Like, I got the joke, but I just didn't find it. It just went a bit too long, I think, for me. Or you could have maybe swapped it out with a quicker joke. I think that was the main detriment I found in this episode overall. I think there were just some of the comedy in this one was just a bit too drawn out. Or, as you said, didn't necessarily have the best punchline to begin with, I think.
Yeah. And then I suppose also with that scene that you just mentioned, it's fine because something we discover later on makes sense. But when Holly actually holds up the book, like he's looking for the answer, it's like, well, hold on, he's a computer. he didn't hold up a physical book, but I think, that kind of makes sense later on, that because he was doing it deliberately. Let's just say.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm talking about it like it's a spoiler. I mean, I'm presuming everybody's watched the episode that's listening to this podcast. They know what's coming.
Yeah, if you haven't, there's going to be major spoilers imminently, and I highly advise you go and watch this episode. Because it all builds to the sort of big climactic scene back in the control room where Holly challenges Queeg to a game of his choice. The victor gets command of Red Dwarf. The loser gets erased permanently from the computer bank. So for the crew and Holly, it's quite, it's presented as quite high stakes. And I must admit, maybe they did it one or two times a bit much, but I did enjoy the fact, Holly trying to suggest any other game and Queeg just goes, chess. I liked it. Again, I think maybe they did it one too many times, but the idea of the joke I did find quite funny at first.
Yeah. And then you get in the actual chess game itself was quite tense. I thought they kind of presented that really well. In a kind of, it was tense, but it was also humorous because you had Holly, with his word, the way he was referring to all the pieces like bish, horsey, the prawns, and things like that.
Horsey takes king prawn.
Pawn to queen 5.
Horsey to bish 3.
Bishop pawn to queen 3. Takes pawn.
Prawn to king 4. Horsey to bish 3. Prawn takes horsey.
Bishop pawn takes pawn.
Bish takes prawn.
Bishop to knight 5. Double check and mate, sucker.
Oh yeah, didn't see that.
Yeah. No, and I must admit, I was quite surprised when, it gets further and further because, again, spoilers are coming, so go and watch it now if you haven't. But Holly actually loses the game. And I must admit, I was quite surprised. I guess I just thought because, this is, it's hard, it's a sitcom, and it's that sitcom thing of, 95% of the time, the goodies or the ones you like always come out on top. I was half expecting Holly to use that sort of weirdness with his words to win somehow, like maybe confuse Queeg to like give up or just something like that. So I was actually quite surprised. I wasn't expecting Holly to lose. And it then leads to a scene where, Holly says goodbye to the crew. And I must admit, as it was going on, I found it surprisingly emotional because, for a first timer like me, I know some of you who've watched it, you're probably laughing, and we'll get to that. But for a first timer like me, he's been part of the crew from episode 1, and I think where it was sort of emotional is it's that thing of, he is a main character, but he also isn't. Like I see the main crew. It's Lister and Rimmer and Kat mainly. That's the three that get involved. Holly's always there, but he's not always active in the situation. But I think it made you emotional because it's like, oh, he has always been there, and now he's supposedly not going to be there. And the episode actually does a good build at making you think there's not going to be a reason otherwise. You might think maybe Norman Lovett decided to pack it in back in the day. Do you know what I mean? There's no sort of indication that they're not going to follow through with this, I think.
So at that point, did you, as someone who hadn't seen it before, did you assume because you said at the chess game you were thinking that they were going to, he was going to kind of pull a thing out of his hat and win by his slightly quirky nature. At this point, once he'd lost the chess game, what did you think was going to happen? Did you think that at this point, did you think he was leaving?
Legitimately, because again, it's that sitcom trope that in times of great stakes, the good character will always pull something out of the bag to like seize the day and deliver a joke at the end. So I think the fact that he lost to begin with, I was like, okay, that surprised me. And then just with how that scene is played afterwards, with the crew, for the most part, like Holly delivers a few funny gags about them, but you know what I mean? For the most part, it's not played for laughs.
I hope you Phil to the cat.
I hope one day in the not too distant future you fulfil your heart's desire and get your end away.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they were funny, but do you know what I mean? Like it was played for like this character is leaving.
And there was some very, somber music in the background.
Yeah. And he's trying to sing his way out, but gets cut off. And I liked how they didn't cut away when he faded. It just held on the screen that said "erase complete." It's quite a stark image. I just thought, that was Holly's time. I thought that was, sitcoms characters change, things come and go. I was like, well, that's that then. And do you want, before we go further, did you want to say anything about the sort of aftermath of the lost scene, or are you?
No, I mean, the thing is, I knew what was coming. So,
yes,
obviously, this is where this is interesting, because you didn't know what was coming next. So, you didn't, you felt very different watching it in terms of the emotional aspect of it than I did, because I knew what was coming next. So, I mostly focused it on the comedy of that and the lines that Holly had.
Yeah.
And because then, of course, Queeg comes back on.
He does.
Starts, being his usual brash, insulting self. And then suddenly, he's got Holly's voice.
Yes.
There's only one thing I want to say to you.
What? What's happening, dudes? We are talking Jape of the Decade. We are talking April, May, June, July, and August fall. Yes, that's right. I am Queeg.
Because it was Holly all along.
Hey,
I feel we need a song now. Like, I don't know if you've watched WandaVision, but there's the Agatha all along song.
Yeah,
it was Holly all along.
Imagine. But and I wrote this in my notes, my gut reaction was, what? Like, it was all a prank? ? And I think for like the first 30 seconds, I was a bit like, no, come on. I was like, you've done all this, you've done all this setup. Queeg as a character I thought was interesting as like an antithesis to Holly. You had the stakes of the chess thing. I've been surprised that he lost. And so I think for the first 30 seconds, I was a bit like, no, not happy with this. It's a cop-out ending. It's the whole, not it was all a dream, but like you say, it was me all along. It was in modern YouTube terms, it was, it's just a prank, bro. It was that sort of vibe. And I was like, no, don't like that. But as it played on, to see how much Holly enjoys it, again, he's not like jumping off the walls going, I tricked you. It's still that same deadpan, but you can see in his smile and his smirk and his quips that he's loving every minute of it. I think that won me back over, because I'm like, of course Holly would do something like this. Do you know what I mean? Just to pull the wool over their eyes a bit. So by the time the credits rolled, I was smiling. All that sort of initial, like, what had faded away. I think it was just the surprise of it, you know.
And I think it's because he has a good reason for doing it as well. You know, and it ties into what I think are probably the themes of the episode, really, which are like loyalty and stuff that gets touched on at various points in the episode. He felt that they were taking him for granted, that they, you know, had a very low opinion of him and his abilities and stuff. And so he thought, right, I'm going to teach them a lesson. And he did. And so it makes sense because they do sort of deride him. And, you know, as we've seen, he does make a lot of mistakes, but
he does, yeah.
Clearly he is capable because as Queeg, he was getting everything, you know, spot on. So he can do it. It's just his personality that is causing that. Yeah. But the themes of loyalty and stuff, there was a bit earlier on where Rimmer was discussing it, and it's when they decided that, oh no, Queeg isn't bad, but they hadn't jumped to, you know, back when Queeg first turned up. Nobody had really defended Holly. And as Rimmer says, we thought we were going to get something better. And I think it's quite a, you know, message that, you know, you don't just ditch your friends because, you know, something better might come along.
Yeah. No, it does spark good, and I think that theme ties into, you know, that as I say, that moment for me where you think Holly is gone, where he says, you know, just sort of, you know, I wasn't perfect, but we had a giggle, we had a laugh. It's, you know, you could argue it's the typical farewell speech, but I mean, again, when like me, when I thought he was going and you see him fade and you see a race complete, you know, it is that sort of moment, like, oh, you know, oh God, it's that you don't know what you've got till it's gone, you know, and I think that you reflect that in the crew for those brief seconds before Holly reveals the true nature of it all. But yeah, I think you're right, the themings are quite strong, and they're not necessarily shoved in your face at every turn, but I just think they play out quite well. Like I said, the emotion I felt in that scene, thinking Holly was gone, was there, you know, from how the episode set itself up and from how this character had been built up and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think the themes worked to their absolute strength in this. As I said, for about 30 seconds I was like, no, don't like this, not having this. But again, like, just seeing how much joy, like, Holly took out of doing it, and, like I say, tying back to the themes, as I said, by the end, I was like, yeah, it's fine. And I'm sure if I rewatched it now with your perspective, like, the hindsight of knowing, I think I'd be alright with it as well. But yeah, I think it's one of those episodes of TV that it's quite special watching it for the first time in a way. Because
I think it must be, because I can't remember the first time I saw it, so I can't remember what I thought of it the first time I saw it. I've always just kind of now I only remember knowing what happens, and therefore I don't quite get the same thing, but it is still an enjoyable episode, and there's still a lot in it that even knowing what's coming, it's still enjoyable and it's still good.
Yeah, it was one moment I can compare it to, maybe not on the same scale, but it's the one that's coming to mind. Flipping to those of you who know Doctor Who, it's like the Stolen Earth cliffhanger with David Tennant, you know. The Doctor finally reunites with Rose. It's a moment we've all been waiting for. And then he gets shot down by a Dalek and starts regenerating. And then you know, back then, that first time, we all had to wait a whole week to find out. We didn't, well, you know, you could speculate, but we didn't know what was going to happen. Whereas now, like you say, there's still plenty of stuff in the Stolen Earth and Journey's End to enjoy, but you can never recapture that same, oh my God, what is going to happen? Because we know what happens. I think it's that very special first time thing you get with watching TV with things like this. And yes, you could say, oh, you know, Red Dwarf, this sort of prank thing, it's not on the same scale. But I think it is the same sort of thing. Like, you know, for me, I didn't know what was going to happen. And I had an idea, and it got subverted. So I'd say that's good TV, if you ask me. So good job, Red Dwarf. But in this episode then, Phil, what was your funniest moment?
I think it's the reveal at the end. There's just that moment where Holly's voice comes out of Queeg's mouth, and it's like, that's good. Because although I knew what was coming, I couldn't necessarily remember how it transpired, and so there was still that kind of like, oh yes, brilliant, and so that moment was probably the funniest bit, I think, for me. What about yourself?
Well, it wasn't that one because I spent the first 30 seconds going, what? No, no. But the funniest one for me, we've already mentioned it, but it's Chris Barry's impersonations. I was howling throughout that whole scene. And I forgot as well, the one that got me the most that we didn't mention is the brief one he does of the cat.
Hey, now he's me!
Because it's just like, wow. He does it so perfectly, and it got me completely.
They are, they're really good. I'd say my favorite in terms of the best impression he did. I think it was of Holly and of just like Norman Lovett's dead tone delivery as well. He mimicked it perfectly.
Yeah, I'd actually go as far to say, off the top of my head, that's probably one of my funniest scenes of the whole show so far. That impression scene. I just think I can't think of another scene off the top of my head that's made me laugh as much as I did watching it. So that's definitely at this point, my favourite, funniest moment of the show. So, well done, episode Queeg. You've done good. But on this episode as well, one thing we like to do on this podcast is say who our favourite character was in this story. So, Phil, who was your favourite character in this story?
I think it's gonna have to be Holly again. I've chosen Holly a couple of times now because Chris Rimmer is brilliant in that scene, and he has a couple of other nice moments. It was a close one between him and Rimmer, I think, for me. But this is Holly's episode, and
absolutely,
it's definitely like he doesn't get much chance to shine. He's usually pops in and like. He's usually great in every time he does pop in, but he just pops in occasionally, does the occasional thing, and pops out again. But it's very much a side character. But here, the focus was like really on him. So, I think Holly definitely.
No, it's a solid choice. Always a good reason for picking Holly because Norman Lovett always does a pretty bang up job. For me, honestly, I think I've got to give it to Charles Orgins as Queeg, just because I think guest characters almost in this show have even more pressure to leave a good impression because obviously we're so used to the main cast and how brilliant they are. So when a new person comes in, it's like, right, well, you better be as good as them, otherwise you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. But I just think the way Charles does it, again, it's the perfect antithesis to what Holly is, but still with it's still sort of a deadpan, but in a completely different manner. And I think he makes it work brilliantly, his whole demeanour. And even though he's meant to be like this stern sort of dictator sergeant major, he still made me laugh a lot with the things he said and the things he got the crew to do. So, whilst Rimmer's impressions did make me laugh the most, I think my favourite character, the one who brought a smile no matter what he was doing, was probably Queeg. So I'll give it to the star of the episode, so to speak. Even if it was, but I mean, by extension, it's Holly anyway. So we've both technically gone for Holly.
We've both gone for Holly. Yeah, it was Holly all along. So absolutely. We have both gone for Holly.
That's a good choice. And one of the other things we do on this show to round off this episode is how many scutters would you rate it out of 10, Phil?
I would probably give it. I'm gonna give it 8 scutters, and I point out we are now pronouncing scutters correcly. I've had so many comments in the first few episodes of this podcast saying, they're not called scuttlebugs and they're not called scuttlers. Yeah, okay, we got it eventually, guys.
Yeah, all right, guys. Scutters. Come on. Yeah, Scutter. 8. That's a solid choice. What would you say? What brought it down by those last two for you?
Some of the jokes being laboured and going on a little bit too long, I think were the main things that held it back. I think.
Yeah, that's fair. I think what I'd give it, I was toying between 2, but I think I'll give it a 9 actually, which I can't remember if that's my highest rating so far. It might be.
I think it might be.
I was toying between 8.5 and 9 because my detractions are similar to yours in the way that I think, as we've said, some of the comedy felt a bit laboured. But on the whole, as I've said, for me as a first-time viewer, this episode worked on many levels for me. The introduction of Queeg as a complete different side character, Chris Barry being hilarious, some genuine emotion for me towards the end. And whilst I like my comedy, I do like a dash of drama as well. So yeah, I think this is the episode that maybe has made me feel the most, if that makes sense, both in comedy and with drama. And I like, it sounds weird, but when I watch TV, I like to feel things a lot of the time. So yeah, I just think this is one of the best episodes we've seen so far, to be honest. I'd be curious as if we ever did this in the future, and like looked back. Part of me sadly thinks I might not give it a 9, partly because of I know what's coming. But as it stands, first time viewing, I'll give it a 9 out of 10.
That's
Absolutely
solid. Nice. I think that is your highest score. I was actually tempted to give it an 8.5. I was going between, like you were going between 8.5 and 9. I was going between 8 and 8.5. And yeah, just the slightly laboured jokes, and also some of the effects that we talked about earlier, like the rocking and stuff. Although there was one other effect that I completely forgot to mention, is when Lister gets electrocuted by putting the wrong wires together.
Yes,
that also looked a bit ropey. But the timing of him going, sort of putting them together and just sort of shaking like he was being electrocuted didn't quite work. But no, other than those. Really good episode. Very much enjoyed it.
Definitely one of the standouts. And I mean, it's weird in a way because that was episode 5, and on next week's Everybody's Dead Day, we'll be looking at episode 6, which is actually the last episode of series 2, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Can you, obviously without revealing much yet, can you remember much about the series 2 finale?
A little bit, yeah. Because I remember bits. It's the parallel universe one.
Oh, okay. I like parallel universe.
I love a parallel universe too, and there's some good. I think there's some good stuff in it. I like. It's been so long since I've seen it. Might even be like 10 years actually, but it's. Yeah, I think there's some good stuff that will also pay off some other stuff. I'm not going to say more. Pay off some other stuff from previous episodes.
Right. So we've definitely got to be keeping our eyes open for that one. So, I mean, if a parallel universe doesn't intrigue you enough, you should definitely tune in to Everybody's Dead Day next week for that. But that was our summary of episode 5 of series 2, titled Queeg. We hope you enjoyed it. And if, as I said, if you're new, go back and check out our previous episodes as well. We've covered all of series 1 and now nearly all of series 2. All episodes you can find either on YouTube, on Phil's channel, and if you do, go and subscribe to his channel as well, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is generally appreciated and very helpful. And we're also on Spotify. Just search Everybody's Dead Dave, and you'll be able to listen to our wonderful voices for as long as you like over
on
there.
Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts,
there you
all
go.
of the favourite podcast
Everything.
platforms.
You can't escape. We are everywhere.
So many that I've not even heard of.
Oh, yeah, so many. I mean, but you look at the analytics and it's like, 3% use this obscure thing you've never heard of. It's like, okay, well, I guess that's where it's going. But give us a listen on all of those and give us a follow or subscribe or whatever it is on those. And aside from all that, Phil, where can people find you if they want to keep in touch or keep up to date?
You can find me on my Twitter account, which is currently IUDEX_Phil, 1L in Phil. And also, obviously, on my YouTube channel, which you may well be watching this on, which is just my name, Philip Hawkins.
Yeah,
1L.
And click subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to keep up to date with myself, I'm also on Twitter at Adam Martyn Actor, where I tweet my general ramblings of the day. I'm also on YouTube. Just type in Adam Martyn, Martyn with the Y. I should pop up, and I make stuff in a way similar to Philip. A lot of pop culture stuff, Doctor Who, and other things I'm interested in too. Just check it out. I'm sure there'll be something for you there. And if you like what you see, subscribe too. And yes, that has been this episode of Everybody's Dead, Dave, and I'm sure we will see you next time for Series 2, Episode 6. But until then, ta-ra for now.
Bye-bye.